I'm going to talk this evening a bit about refuge, which is one of my most favorite topics of late. But I want to start by sharing a little bit of a story about a retreat that I just was part of. And let's see, Maggie was there, and Nina and Caleb were there. So I just had this wonderful opportunity to spend, what was it, 5 days, something like that, at Tassajara, which is the Zen monastery where I lived and trained some time ago. And I taught a retreat workshop with a teacher named Jan Willis, who some of you may know or know of. Jan was a professor at the university where I went to school. And sadly for me, I wasn't really very interested in Buddhism at the time. So I never took her class while I was there. I missed out in a big way. But she has been a professor and teacher of Buddhism for 36 years, something like that. And she has a couple of books, a memoir called Dreaming Me, Black, Buddhist, and Baptist, which is her story. And she has a remarkable story. She grew up in the Jim Crow South. She marched with Dr. King as a teenager when she was, young. And she tells this amazing story in her memoir, and she shared with us when we were with her, of this key point in her life where she could have either chosen to join the Black Panthers or to go to India and study with Lama Yeshe. And she chose to go to India, and that was a real key moment in her life, which grounded her deeply, deeply in the Dharma. And those of us who had the privilege of spending time with her, she's a remarkable storyteller. Really just, she's a hoot, actually. She's quite brilliant, but she's also just a delight and a marvelous, marvelous storyteller. So I have actually been reading her second book, which is this one, called Dharma Matters, Women, Race, and Tantra. And she tells this story in the opening of this book about the first time she ever gave a talk on Buddhism, a lecture, a public lecture. And she was teaching at UC Santa Cruz, and she gave a talk on sort of introduction to Buddhism. And she describes that at the end of the lecture, this young man raised his hand from the front row and said, "So, what does this Buddha guy and his Buddhism have to do with me?" And when I read that, it stayed with me, the question. And she writes that question, she responded to this guy, and, he was happy with her response. But she said that's been the central question for her as a teacher. And I think I just felt a very deep resonance with that story and this sort of very human articulation of what is it? What does that Buddha guy who lived 2,600 years ago in northern India and his Buddhism, his teachings, what does that have to do with us? So I offer that as a kind of backdrop to the rest of what I hope to share with you this evening. And I think really important to start at the beginning, which is the First Noble Truth, or as we're teaching it, or will be teaching it in this 6-week class, the first ennobling truth, which is the truth of dukkha, This is the ground from which all of Buddha's teachings spring. And of course, what this Buddha guy has to do with me and with you and with all of us is that he suffered too. And he made a vow, he committed himself to understanding suffering and understanding what's possible for us. What's possible for us as human beings who live in a realm where there is individual, collective, systemic suffering. Is there a way in the midst of this suffering to be free? Now, being free doesn't mean that we never have any unpleasant experience. I say this a lot. That's the fantasy, that we end up someplace where like everything just works out for us. That's not what it means. What it means is that we learn how to meet our experience, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, in a different way. And this is the whole of the Buddhist path, is many, many, many different windows and doorways that we are invited to engage, that we are invited to step into, that allow us to meet our life in a new way. And the teaching of refuge, so the teaching of refuge is often referred to as the teaching of the three treasures or the triple gem. The teaching of refuge is, for me, kind of both the beginning, the middle, and the end of the path. Refuge is the place that we enter. When we're suffering, we enter a place of refuge, which is entering, is there a way? Is there a place that I can feel safe? Is there a place that I can come home to? Is there a way to live in the world with all of its churn and difficulty where it's possible to be free? We begin by taking refuge or receiving refuge, which is a teaching of, as I have been referring to it a lot, of a kind of radical reorientation. We imagine that refuge is a place. And most of us imagine that refuge is a place somewhere else. Can't possibly be right here. But this is the beginning of the reorientation, because even the word refuge in the Latin is refuge. Re is always, the prefix re always means again, like return or remember, right? So to turn again, or to remember is to member as parts, and to put the parts back together again. It's a quality of wholeness. And that re points us in the direction of this reorientation, that we're not going out somewhere to find something, that we are returning. Literally means, the word refuge, refuge, means to fly back, to come home. This is the reorientation. We have most of our sense experience comes through the eyes, and the eyes are always looking out. So we're always looking for, where is it? And when we begin to practice, the basics of our meditative practice are to shut the eyes or have a soft gaze so that our attention can land here instead of going out. And it's fine for the attention to go out. It's important. But there's also a place to come home. And this coming home, sometimes I think of it as shifting from horizontal to vertical, right? Most of the time we're moving across the surfaces of our life. We're trying to get from point A to point B. That's both getting to a place, and we also apply that to ourselves, right? We think I am trying to transform myself from where I am now into some other being, some better version of myself. But our practice doesn't move that way. The practice is vertical. The practice is dropping down. We stop that churn, that perpetual movement forward for at least a little while, and we land, right, here. Another way to say it is that we drop below the habitual churn of our ideas, our stories, our beliefs. You know what I mean. That mind, the papancha mind that's just spinning all the time. And we invite ourselves in our practice. We don't have to get rid of our thoughts. We just have to remember that it's not the only thing happening. And we give ourselves this immediacy, this direct taste, that the thought is not the only thing that's happening. The story is not the only thing that's happening. The memory and the plan and all that makes us so tired. So one of the ways that I've been talking about it is that in any moment, there are two things. There's actually three, but I'll start by saying two things. There's awareness, and there's the content of awareness. And most of our life, we're completely swept up in the content. Content of awareness means what I see, what I hear, what I smell, what I taste, what I touch. And for most of us, it's largely about what I think or think and feel. We live in this constructed world in which the mind it's making a world. It's making a me and a you and a whole universe every moment. In Buddhism, we say we're perpetually taking birth as a being in this constructed world. And when we sit, it can all keep going, all of that churn, the chop at the top of the ocean. And meanwhile, we may get even a teeny little taste, just a momentary glimpse, sliver of awareness itself. The thing that's aware of all that churn is not the churn. It's also not different. So the metaphor that's often used is the churn at the top of the ocean. Is this beautiful image in Zen, and that the churn at the top of the ocean, and we have our head bobbing just above the water, and then we have this really, 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 really long body that goes all the way down to the ocean floor, where it's dark, cool, still, quiet. It's the same water, right? It's all made of the same thing, but very different dimensions of it. And when we're only in the churn and we forget our depths, which we don't have to make up, it's already here, then we're just being batted around by our life. when we have a practice, it doesn't have to be a meditative practice. Many of you have other kinds of practice. It could be a physical practice, it could be a artistic practice, it could be a being in nature practice, anything that reconnects us with that dimension of depth gives us a quality of wholeness that doesn't happen when we're just flopping around at the top. So this, all of what I'm talking about is pointing in the direction of what refuge means. Refuge isn't about going someplace else outside or beyond where we are now. It's about fully landing. It's a wholehearted invitation, finding refuge, receiving refuge, taking refuge. And that invitation is, as I'm saying, a reorientation. This is why it's so hard. I remember year after year going on retreat, and I'd get to the retreat and I'd have this kind of nervous, excited energy. And then at some point I'd feel like, oh shit, right? Like I'm not going to get something. It's all about landing, being right where we are. This isn't what we expect, but it's way better than we expect. So we come to the path, so many of us, certainly true for me, out of our suffering, right? We come because either we're suffering or we're impacted by the world's suffering. And we imagine, when I first came to the Dharma, I just was sure that I needed to be fixed. I was broken and I needed to be fixed, and I wanted the practice to fix me. It's so vivid for me, remembering the first times that I walked into San Francisco Zen Center, which was filled with these very strange looking people with bald heads and black robes. And, you know, the whole vibe of the place was like, I thought it was very strange. But there was a quality, which I would now call a quality of presence, that I felt, even if I didn't understand it. I felt it in the people around me. It was very, very evocative for me to go back to the monastery where I was and to remember, you know, all of that. It was like someone had opened a door I didn't know was possible. And I didn't know what it was. Like, what's with these people? I didn't have any idea. And my mind was full of judgment, you know. But very vividly remember thinking, yes, whatever it is they have, because I could feel it. That's what I want. That's what I want. So we imagine that refuge is something that it's not often. We think we're going to get an improved version of ourselves. We think we're going to get fixed. We think we're going to get someplace there's no more suffering anymore. We have all kinds of ideas about what refuge is. But if we're willing to step in, what we discover is actually something much, much better. I'll read you a description of this that I found or refound today. This is from the last chapter of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, who founded Tassajara. It's his kind of seminal book. And he describes what I'm talking about as awareness and content as big mind and small mind. And really what happens as we take refuge and we enter the path, is that we begin to balance a sense of big mind and small mind. Mostly when we come in, it's all small mind. It's all chop and churn. And we don't even really know that big mind is possible. So this is how he says it. The main point of our practice is to have confidence in big mind. The big mind we have confidence in is not something you can experience objectively. It is something which is always within you, always on your side. That's his way of saying, it's not out there, my friends. It's not objective, it's subjective. It's here. He says, if you think that big mind is somewhere outside yourself, outside your practice, that is a mistake. Big mind is always with us. This mind, which is always on your side, is not just your mind. It is universal mind. Always the same, not different from another's mind. You must put confidence in big mind, which is always with you. This is more than faith. It is ultimate truth. So we come into the practice maybe not so sure, not so confident. Is it really possible to take refuge? Is it really possible to have confidence in this big mind? And as we practice, we take it is a leap of faith in a way to enter this doorway of refuge, to allow ourselves to be reoriented in this way. And then little by little, our faith grows, our confidence grows. We discover, as the Buddha said, ehipassiko, come see for yourself. That initially, maybe we're inspired by someone else, like I was, right? I didn't know what it was, but I felt something in the people I saw, and I thought, that, right? So maybe in the midst of our churn and suffering, we get a glimmer, right? This is what happened to the Buddha, right? We have this story, a mythic story of the 4 heavenly messengers. An old man, a sick man, a corpse, old age, sickness, and death. Fundamental human suffering. And he saw those, and they launched him onto the path. But he also saw the 4th messenger. The 4th messenger was a wandering sadhu, someone he saw peacefully walking back and forth under the shade of the tree. And perhaps like me, he said, that. Maybe he didn't know what it was exactly either, but that's what I want. So it goes from being inspiration out there to, as we practice, we discover it's in here. And ultimately, of course, it's all the same. Meaning what's in here and what's out there, it's all made of the same water. Just different flavors, different varieties. Like that. So the refuge is this doorway to the path. And I'll just mention a little bit about what it is we take refuge in, because it's very different than what we would think we take refuge in our normal life. Some of you know there's this teaching called the 8 worldly winds, which are, I had to write them down, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, praise and blame, fame and ill repute. So most of us, without thinking about it too much, assume that the four good ones, the four positive of those eight, pleasure, gain, praise, and fame, that's what we want. That's what we chase after. That's what we think will make us happy. And the Buddha is saying, let me save you a lot of struggle by suggesting that those things are fine. If you get praise, enjoy it. If you have fame, enjoy it. If you gain and get things, or you have a pleasurable experience, please enjoy it. But just don't think that that's what's going to make you happy. Because everything's changing all the time. So you will have a pleasurable experience and it will go away. You may have a period of fame, it won't last, etc., etc. Right? That's just the nature of life itself. And so the Buddha says, instead of that, look over here. This is the reorienting. And the three jewels, the three gems, the triple treasure, are the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And those of you who know me will have heard this story before, but I have to tell it because it's very funny, which is the first time I sat sesshin, which is a 7-day retreat in the Zen style. There was, you have your meals in the meditation hall. And it's a formal ceremony with these little bowls that they come and serve you, and then they fill them with water and you clean them, and no dishes. You do the whole thing right there at your seat. And the whole thing is a ceremony. And as the meal is unfolding, there's lots of chanting and so on. Anyway, part of the meal chant is something like, the line says, we venerate the three treasures and give thanks for this food. So one day, we chant that every day, the three treasures. One day the teacher decided to give a talk about the three treasures. And he started to expound and tell us about these three treasures, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And the woman who was sitting next to me in the meditation hall, who like me was new, she leaned over to me and whispered and said, I thought the three treasures were breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So for any of you who've ever been on a meditation retreat, you'll understand, right? The meals are the big entertainment of what's happening. You're sitting there with yourself the whole time, and then the meals, right? So that's our usual mind. We imagine that's what's going to make us happy. And if you have a really good meal, please enjoy it, right? But breakfast, lunch, and dinner are not the three treasures. The three treasures are the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Right? So the Buddha is the teacher. The Buddha is the inspiration. The Buddha is the possibility of awakening. Let's orient toward that instead of praise and blame, gain and loss, fame and ill repute. That's radical. Am I going to orient my life toward waking up, toward the possibility of freedom and liberation? And if I am, what does that mean? What am I going to do? What am I going to let go of? Who am I going to participate, engage with? If that becomes my focus. It is a beautiful vision, Refuge in Buddha. This possibility for each of us. The Buddha was not a god. The Buddha was a human being like us, who struggled like us. And he's offering us this possibility to wake up, to be free. To be free doesn't mean You never have any unpleasant experience. To be free means the ability to respond fresh, to cut the karmic chains of whatever it is you've come in with. And we all have our karmic difficulty that we come in with, that we're able to say enough of that and respond fresh. It's so powerful, actually. I always think of the story about Nelson Mandela when he had been freed from prison and was now the president of South Africa. And he was out having lunch. And there was a man in the restaurant who he invited over to come and sit with him and his entourage. And as the man sat and had lunch with them, he was sweating and shaking and clearly upset. And after he left, one of the guards said to Mandela, one of his bodyguards said, that man seemed like he was really ill or something. And Mandela said, no, he wasn't ill. He was one of my guards when I was in prison. And after they beat me, I would beg him for just a little bit of water. Could I please just have a little bit of water? And that guard would urinate on my head. And he said, that man was shaking because he thought that I was going to take revenge. He thought that I was going to do something to harm him in response to what he did to me. He said, but that's not the way I work. There is someone who says, no, we're not going to pass on that karmic chain of harm, of violence, of cruelty. And that's what's possible for us when we say, I'm going to turn myself this way. I'm going to take refuge in the possibility of being free, of not having to repeat whatever it is. So the other jewels, the Dharma and Sangha, I'm not going to talk about now because I want to hear a little bit from you all. But I will say very briefly that the Dharma jewel is understood as the Buddha's teaching, but also simply as the truth. This is a radical premise, that we can take refuge in the truth. What's actually happening, that's the place of refuge. And the Sangha is the community. The Sangha is the truth that while nobody can do your practice for you, we don't actually walk alone. It's just not how it works. That we are infinitely and intricately interconnected. This is the truth of love. This is the truth of what holds us together as human beings. This is what we take refuge in. So we are at time, and we'll do just a moment of the traditional dedication of merit, which is a practice of generosity. It's where I started out this evening. The understanding is that whatever benefit we may have received from tonight or from anything that happens in our life, that benefit is multiplied when we share it, when we offer it, when we don't hold on too tightly just for ourselves. So if you will take a moment and let your eyes close And just feel into anything from this evening that may have been touched in you. Maybe a moment of inspiration, a question, a sense of possibility, of remembering. And then offering up, opening our hands, opening our hearts, freely and generously sharing. By the power and truth of our practice together, may any goodness, any benefit, any merit that has come be freely and generously shared for the well-being of all beings everywhere. May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings everywhere awaken and be free. Thank you all so much for your kind attention.